Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, it's time to lift my 4th gen Toyota Tacoma. If you saw in the previous video, the collection day, I threw on the 35-inch tires. I could drive it like this. There is some trimming to do, maybe a different alignment just to do minimal trimming, but today let's lift the truck. Hopefully that means zero or very minimal trimming with the lift kit. I'm super excited. It is going to give it a really cool look. So today let's install the Peak Suspension 2-piece trail kit. As you can tell, there's not much to the kit, but it is going to give us just over 2 inches of lift in the front. We have a top plate spacer. There's also an adapter that goes in the lower section, and then we have the rear. Now there's two different options you can go with this kit. For the rear, you have a 1-inch lift. I decided to go with the 2-inch lift. I will be using my truck for towing, so I wanted a little bit lift in the rear, so that way when I am towing, it doesn't have a sag to it, so it's going to be a little bit more level when towing. Now with this kit too, you do need a spring compressor, so I will have a link down in the description below. These are pretty cheap to pick up, and they're not really all that hard to use, so I'll go into greater details, of course, on how to go through that. And there are plenty of lift kits that you can go with for the Tacoma, just depending on your budget. The size that you want, you can get upper control arms too. There's various other kits. I'll have that link again down in the description below, where you can basically piece it together. You can go with a 1-inch, a 2-inch, you can just do the front if you're adding 33s and you just want a more level front. It looks like the rake on this truck is pretty significant just by looking at the front and rear as it sits right now. Now I've also done measurements of the truck completely stock, so with the stock tires, we're doing ground clearance, a few other points around the vehicle. I just finished doing a walk around of all the measurements now, and then I will get more measurements once I have it lifted. We'll go around that and talk about that at the end of the video. So stick around for that. Along with a drive with this lift kit, we'll see how it rides and how it looks. So I'm going to start off with the front suspension, and I just want to show how I got the vehicle off the ground. So there is a jack point just inside the lower control arm. So that is what I use to raise the vehicle. If I left it there, I want the lower control arm to be free, because we do have to lower it in order to remove the entire assembly there. And then I also have a safety jack just in front of the lower control arm on the back there, and then under this cross member right here. Since I will be moving the floor jack itself, I need to put it under the hub assembly, which you'll see here soon. And it's not really all that hard to remove this. It is a little bit tedious. There's no particular order that you have to start in, but for now, I'm just going to start top to bottom. So up top, there are 4 bolts that hold the strut assembly to this portion here. And then right in the middle, this bolt is mainly for the compression and the tension that's on the strut assembly itself. I'm going to loosen all 5 of these, but not completely remove them, especially the one in the middle. Now it is going to be easier to loosen this while it's on the vehicle, but we can't completely remove that until we have the spring compressed. So to start on the 4 on the outside, I am using a 14 millimeter, and I do have a socket here that has the hollow opening in it. You could use an open-ended wrench or something like that. This is just a little bit easier. And then to work on the bolt in the middle, this is a 19 millimeter. The next bolt I'll move on to is the sway bar end link here. I'm using a 3/4 on my breaker bar. Luckily the nut is welded on the other side, so we just have to worry about the outside here. And I will break that loose. The next 3 bolts require the same size. I'm using a 7/8 for the bolt that connects the lower portion of the strut assembly. So I have my breaker bar to loosen that. And then the 2 underneath are going to be a little bit tricky. So on the passenger side here, I'm pulling away from the vehicle, and you really just have to kind of work it. And just like that, we can get that one loose. So this bolt is a little tricky. I was able to use my drill bit to back this all the way out, but from here I'm going to go by hand. It's the same size, of course, as the nut. There we go. So it went in the down direction there, which is why I didn't want to have any weight on it to allow it to do that. And the last bolt I'm working on is for the tie rod end. Now there is this cotter pin here that you need to bend out of the way. And the reason that I'm removing this is to get more access for the entire assembly to come out. Now you could loosen the lower control arm bolts. I don't have the power tools to loosen those bolts. Nor do I really want to mess with those, because at least I'll be in somewhat of a factory alignment to get this to the alignment shop. So you could loosen the lower control arm bolts if you wanted to push this out of the way, but this is going to be just as easy and much easier to reinstall. Now this bolt, I am using a 15/16 for my breaker bar here. And with a little bit of force with the breaker bar, it's pretty easy to loosen, and then you can do it by hand the rest of the way. Now here, I am just going to use a hammer to release that. It's not going to damage any of the threads, but I am just going to move it to the side, and it's actually just going to hold right there. So now that everything is disconnected, I went ahead and removed those final 4 bolts or nuts on the upper section. This is where it is going to be a little bit tricky. So since I'm not completely loosening the lower control arm like you could do, oh, there we go. All right, so with a nice firm push down, whew, okay. As easy as this truck has been to work on so far, you think Toyota would not put this massive welded piece holding the bottom of the assembly, because you really got to work that. And again, being careful with that tie rod end. There we go, we are disassembled. So it's time to move on to the disassembly, where we're using the spring compressor kit. This is something that you want to just take an extra precaution when using, because this spring is under a lot of load. So I'm going to be working on the left side or the right side. I don't want to work over top of it. I also have this aiming straight out of the garage, so if something were to go wrong, at least I have forwards and backwards where it wouldn't necessarily damage anything else, including myself. So when using the spring compressor kit, you want to make sure that you have easy access, of course, to tighten it, and you have it on some pretty wide settings. I don't want to have them so close, because that's not going to get anywhere. You need to have a far out reach, in order to compress it. So I have one on this side aiming up, so that way when I tighten it, I can easily reach it from the top with the 7/8, and as I tighten it, the lower section has room to expand. On the opposite side, I will go in the opposite direction here, just because it will be easier to tighten it from the bottom on this side, and it still has plenty of room to extend past the top here. So I have it pretty snugged up right now to where I can use my 19mm on the very end and start loosening this bolt. All right, so from here, we can easily remove this entire shock assembly now. From here, I'm going to remove this lower section where there is this little piece right on it. I'm actually going to cut that off just so it is a little bit more flush. So just like that, there's still a little bit there, but at least it's flatter than it was. And what we're going to do is line up the new adapter with that kink that lines up with the lower section. So it's just going to sit just like that. Then you're going to put this on top in that same direction. So we're just putting that spacer basically in between what was there and the middle there. So from here, we can put this back through, and you want to line up the lower section with the indentation so there is a spot where it needs to go. And so with this pretty much back together, one thing you want to make note of is how this top plate came off. There is an arrow on it for this passenger side. That arrow is going to be facing backwards. So just double check that when you take it off, so that way you're putting it back on. These 4 bolts are not symmetrical, so it is a different design. And with the nut on top there, you could tighten it all the way or just go as tight as you want to, because once we put this on the truck, it'll be much easier to snug up. So I'm just going to go until I see threads on the top of that nut there. So with this assembly ready to go back on, don't forget the top plate spacer, and it only goes on one way. So like I said, with that top plate too, looks like it is going towards the arrow, so the back of the vehicle. And to put this back on, we're going to go in the same direction, of course, that we took it out. Now it will be helpful to put a bolt in as well. So you can use one of the top bolts once you get it in, just to give yourself another hand, especially if you're doing this by yourself. So that is just going to help hold it in place for me, at least with one of them. So I got the shock in. It's not quite all the way fitted just yet, but I wanted to show a trick that I learned. I used a floor jack to raise up the hub assembly, because if you can see, right in here is where I had my left hand pushing down the lower control arm, and there wasn't that much room with this down. So once I lifted it up, that gave me a lot more space to comfortably place my hand and just push the lower control arm until I could get that in there. Now, of course, I have to wiggle it a little bit more and line up that bolt, but it is in. So now from here, it's just reassembly with the 5 bolts up top. We got the tie rod end, the sway bar, and then those bolts up underneath, and of course the bolt that goes through. Now for the rear, this is how I've jacked it up. There's a sway bar or stabilizer bar with a portion on that rear axle. So I'm using that to lift it up. I have a safety jack up front, and then once we start lowering the axle, this will make more sense why I have one directly underneath the hitch. So there's only 3 things that we have to remove in the back. We have this sway bar end link, which is a 17 millimeter. For the top of the shock, I'm just going to use 2 of these open-ended wrenches, one to hold the top of it from spinning, one to release that actual nut. And then we will disassemble this one screw right here for this bracket. I believe that's a brake line of some kind. And so just to get that out of the way. It's time to remove that end link there. The shock is just going to drop straight down. And from here, we're basically going to touch the axle to the ground now. We are lowering the whole truck very gently. So there's the shock. But now comes the tricky part, because this weighs probably 8 or 9 pounds, which isn't a lot. But when you're upside down and underneath the truck, it can be a good bit. So I am going to attempt to get the spring back in here as upright as possible to then put this giant 2-inch block, just sit it right on top of the spring. Oh, there we go. And before I start lifting it up, you just want to make sure that the lower spring sits in that notch just like up front. So I just had to twist it a little bit, and then here is what it looks like. So you're really not going to see that, but it's up there, it's installed. So now I can lift the axle back up. We'll make sure that the shock goes in its right spot there, and then we have the 2 other bolts, and the back is really that easy. So I'm done with the installation for the lift kit. However, I do have some more work to do. It will depend on your tire size and the offset for your wheel. So I do have some trimming that I need to do. Now there's 2 different routes I could go. Option number 1 is to get the adjustable upper control arms that you can get with this kit. You can use those with a new alignment, push the tire forwards, and that way you won't have any rubbing on the backside. Now, if you look on the driver's side, I don't have much to play with in pushing the tire forwards. So if I did have the adjustable upper control arms, I really don't have much up front. As far as wiggle room goes, I would have a lot more trimming to do up front, especially moving the inner carpeted fender liner there and a lot of pieces underneath where you would be able to easily tell that I cut the front. So what I am planning to do for this setup, since I'm not doing the upper control arms, if I were to do that, I'd go with a new front bumper, just go ahead and cut away the entire front bumper, do the new one, push the tire forward, and I would be good to go. Since I'm not quite there yet, so at some point in the future I will be, I am going to cut on the backside of the tire. Now I'm cutting into a brand new truck, of course, but what I like with Toyota is that they give you this liner here, and if we look at the other side of the truck, which I already cut, unless I told you, you'd have no idea that I cut. So I could put the truck completely back to stock, take the lift off, put the stock wheels and tires on. You would have no idea that I did some trimming behind the tire. So to start on cutting this back section off, I went ahead and removed 2 of the 3 10 mil bolts. There's also this plastic casing that they're in that have these pinchers on the back side of them. You can use a pair of needle nose pliers or just really get your hand all the way into the back here. It's a little bit tight, but doable. Once you have those out of the way, I can take this carpeting and stuff it upwards so that way I have better access here, where the tape line is going to be my cut line as well. So I'm going on this right side here, cutting that off so I can use the tape as a straight line to go right down there. In order to do that, I have this metal cutoff wheel that I can attach to my drill bit. I also have a sanding piece too, and I will be using some touch-up paint to prevent any rust from this cutoff here. So I will be touching that up later once I can drive the truck, of course. But I'll have these down in the description below. I also have my safety goggles since we are cutting metal. You don't want shavings in your eye. And I have my ear protection as well. So this is the tiny sliver that I cut off. It's really not all that bad. Yes, I'm cutting into a truck, but honestly, this piece doesn't even really need to be there. So from here, what I'm doing with this carpeting here is I want to reuse it so that way I can cover it up and it'll look exactly like it did from the factory. So what I need to do is with this upper hole here, I'm going to cut just a little bit off the top of it because I have shifted this whole carpet clockwise, so that way it can line up with the hole up top. So I'll just cut a small notch up there in order to do that. And then on the bottom, I'm going to make a completely new hole right about here to line up with that hole. So now that this original hole here, I'm just going to cut right off, and we'll have that off. We'll have a new hole holding this in place, and you really won't even be able to tell unless you saw this video. And so with the rear done, let's move back to the front because I did drive the truck around just to see how everything was, and it turns out that I really don't have any room to push the tire forward. So like I said earlier with the upper control arm, you'd have to do a lot more cutting if that's something that you want to do. So my solution for up front, I really didn't want to cut, but if you look up underneath, there's this line right here that goes into this portion here. It's not really the straightest line already from the factory, so you can see that I'm just going to continue that line and cut off this lower section. So remove this bolt. That is going to give me a little bit more room. So I'm just going to use that same metal cutoff wheel. I know this is plastic, but it gets the job done. You do have to remove that lower bolt. It is not going back on the vehicle. With the liner kind of facing inwards too, it's not really going to go anywhere. Maybe you could use some 3M tape to tape it down to the inside of the back of the bumper. But with a nice straight line, you really won't even tell that this cut was done because it's following that natural factory line. So here is now the after. As much as I didn't want to cut on both sides, to be honest, this is the gap that I have. So honestly, for daily driving, it's going to be just fine. And then it's just a continuation of that line. So starting from right there, going all the way to the end. So it honestly looks like that's how it could come from the factory up front. So even if I wanted to push the tire forward, I'd still have a lot more cutting to do. That's where doing the high clearance front bumper would come into play. So before we get this out on the road, as well as getting the alignment, let's go over a few of the measurements that I mentioned earlier. Now I will put all of them down in the description below. I'll just go over a few for talking points. We'll start up front with the front jack point, or the lower cross member, which with the factory truck was at 11.5 inches. All said and done, we were up to 14.5 inches. And then in back for the hitch, measured in at 17.5, and all done, we were at 20.5. So all around the truck basically got a nice 3-inch lift. So that's it. The lift kit is installed for my Tacoma, and I've been driving this a few days, just left the alignment shop, so that way we got everything squared away. This has been a really nice ride. Now it is a tad stiffer than the stock suspension, but I like that. It makes it feel a little bit more solid feeling, especially when I am towing with this. That is going to be beneficial for my needs, but it's in no way harsh to make it not a daily driver. I've been driving this for a few days and it's very comfortable. So this is a really nice affordable kit if you're looking for a little bit of extra lift out of your Tacoma, something that isn't going to break the bank. You can do this yourself. There's also some top plate spacer kits where you don't necessarily have to take the whole assembly apart like I did. You can just put on that top plate and get a little bit more level of a truck. So I think it's a really good system, a really good kit with a lot of options depending on what you are doing. And in my case, I was able to clear the 35s with this lift with very, very minor trimming. If you had a narrower tire or a positive offset, you wouldn't have to do that. So this is about as aggressive as you would want to go. Check out all of the parts down in the description below. If you enjoyed today's video, give it a huge thumbs up and consider smashing that subscribe button so you can not only stay up to date with our daily uploads, but also with the future mods that I have coming for this Tacoma. And I will see you all in the next video.